Bakari Sellers drops by to talk about 200 years of lynching and his extraordinary new book. Check this out, leave your comment, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. On the line with us, Bakari Sellers. Bakari is an attorney with Strom Law. He's a CNN political analyst. And he has a new, and previously he was a member of the South Carolina House of Representatives, 2006 to 2014. He was the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor in South Carolina in 2014. He has a new book out. It's titled My Vanishing Country, a memoir by Bakari Sellers. And it's a remarkable story. Bakari, welcome to the program.
First, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I've admired you from afar for a long period of time. So thank you for being gracious enough to allow me to use your platform today.
Well, thank you. It's very considerate. Tell us about Denmark.
Denmark is where I'm from. It's 3 stoplights and a blinking light. It's filled with amazing people, good souls. One of the reasons that my book is entitled My Vanishing Country is Denmark used to be like the rest of the rural South, a place where you had a great deal of upward economic mobility, especially for people of color. You had railroad tracks. If
I can interrupt real quickly, just for people who might be horribly confused right now, we're talking about the city of Denmark, South Dakota, or South Carolina, not the country.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, trust me, that's a bar trick that I pull out sometimes when people ask me where I'm from. I say Denmark and just watch the stairs. But like most of the poor rural South, where you had railroad tracks that go east, west, north, and south, where you have textile mills, etc. What once had a bubbling small businesses and an economy is now vanishing before our eyes. And in My Vanishing Country, what I wanted to do was give a voice to not just the voiceless, but the forgotten working class and forgotten parts of Black America in particular. When we talk about rural in this country, or when we say working class in this country, most times people just consider that to be white. And I tried to throw that on its head and uplift many of these voices which go ignored.
Yeah, in the past few weeks, and we have seen a woman murdered for sleeping while Black. We've seen a man murdered for jogging while Black. Most recently, now a young Black man suffocated to death by a white police officer with his knee on his neck. As he's saying, "I can't breathe." I mean, this is just the deja vu all over again. Can we, and states are opening up and all this sort of stuff, and I think that there's a lot of kind of repressed emotion coming out right now, too. We're seeing people screaming at each other in supermarkets over wearing masks and things, which is minor, obviously, compared to killing Black people, but it seems like there's this kind of whole cloth thing going on across this country that's being exacerbated with the coronavirus of division and fear and hate that has been stoked for, obviously for centuries in this country, but for political purposes in a big way in the modern era, particularly since Brown v. Board and all the Fred Koch paying for those billboards all across America, impeach Earl Warren. Everybody knew what that was about. Through the Reagan Revolution, the Republican Party basically picking the South back up. What's your sense of where we're at right now, and how different is it in places like Denmark, South Carolina, versus New York City, or I'm not sure where you're living right now?
So that's a good question. And, one of the things that the coronavirus, COVID-19, has shown us is the systemic injustice and racism we have in this country. And we can utilize data to pinpoint that. You look at Alabama, has the highest death rate in the entire country, majority of which are Black. From Atlanta, Georgia, to New York City, to Chicago, to Milwaukee, Detroit, where you have African Americans, which are, minority percentages of the population, are the majority of the ones dying. And the reason being is not because we need more vitamin D, as someone told me on C-SPAN on Friday. And the reason being is not because we need to stop drinking and smoking, as the United States Surgeon General stated from the well of the press room in the White House. But we have these systemic and institutionalized structures of racism in our country, which I talk about in my book. And you asked a good question. And so what are those institutions? Well, in Denmark, where I'm from, in a lot of places that are the rural South, the forgotten parts of this country, you live in a food desert, which means that you can't go 2 or 3 miles and get healthy food alternatives, which means that you get Kool-Aid and sugar. You stretch it, you add water, you stretch it for a week. That means you're more likely to probably have diabetes. Because of a lack of expansion of Medicaid, our hospitals are closed down, which means you don't have access to quality care. The water is not potable in my hometown of Denmark, and you have water that is more contaminated than that of Flint, Michigan. And so you're ingesting that. You're breathing in air that is not of quality because you're living next to brownfields or manufacturing plants, and so you're more inclined to have asthma. So all of these things, Tom, lend themselves to when the United States of America gets coronavirus, black folk die. And you talk about that trauma of the systemic injustices, and then I keep having to go on Twitter and on CNN and watch these images of black folk being killed by state-sanctioned violence, whether or not it's Breonna Taylor, who was in her home on a no-knock search warrant, or whether or not it was Ahmaud Arbery, who was just gunned down, or whether or not it's this young man in Minnesota. It doesn't matter. That pain is still there, and for a lot of us, I tried to write about that trauma in My Vanishing Country because it dates back from when my father was arrested and shot in the Orangeburg Massacre, all the way through when my really good friend and colleague in the State House, Clemente Pinckney, was shot in Mother Emanuel AME. And so it's this trauma that's bubbling over, and we're trying to get our voices heard, and I just tried to put that pain on paper.
We're talking with Bakari Sellers. His new book is just absolutely remarkable. It's titled My Vanishing Country, a memoir, and extraordinarily readable. I'm astonished. I saw this again over the weekend. There was some demonstration someplace where a bunch of guys were showing up with Confederate flags and Nazi armbands. There's a discussion right now about taking down the statues of Robert E. Lee, et cetera, in the Capitol building. I mean, the Confederacy, these were traitors. These were people who took up arms against their own country. And
you mean it wasn't the war of northern aggression? It wasn't the war of northern aggression.
Well, honest to God, Bakari, when I grew up in Michigan, and I learned in elementary school it was a war about slavery. But when we moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and my kids went to elementary school, I remember vividly the day that my son, 7, 8 years old, came home, and I said, "What'd you learn in school today?" He said, "We learned about the war of northern aggression." Honest to God. Of course, that was the 1980s, but I mean, yeah. But we are tolerating a level of domestic terrorism and violence that if 1/10 of it, the level of death and violence and just in your faceness had been perpetrated by Muslims, or for that matter by African Americans, all hell would break loose. And yet, when white people do this stuff, we don't even call it domestic terrorism. We have a little less than a minute left before we're going to hit our hard break here, Bakari. What are your thoughts about how we address this? How do we wake?
Well, it's not new. It's not new. And this has been going on from Emmett Till to Jimmy Lee Jackson to the 4 little girls in Birmingham, the Orangeburg Massacre, et cetera. And so when people get My Vanishing Country, I want them to have a sense of understanding of the trauma that black folk in this country go through. And when you have that understanding, then we can have these necessary conversations with understanding, empathy, and compassion. Right now, there's a large segment that doesn't even give me or my children the benefit of our humanity. That's why I wrote this book, and I'm grateful to be here with you today, Tom.